Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Roundup. No special announcements or anything, so let's jump right in. First up, Marco Retro just released another analysis of a downscaling device, this time the MIMO Genius 2. And much like devices such as the UltraCade UVC, this was originally designed to interface different kinds of signals directly into arcade cabs. And at the time of manufacturing, it was a pretty decent choice. However, it has one thing that sets it apart from the rest in a negative way. The rolling latency is so bad that you could actually see a stutter on the screen as a result. So Marco went deep into this in the video. I'll just give a very brief overview, but often you'll see variable latency scalars and stuff like the Tink5X and 4K and their buffered mode. When they go from 0 to 1 frame and back to 0, it is not noticeable in any way in almost all cases. Now, pro gamers and competitions should use like the frame lock mode to get it into the basically 0 latency mode, but still, even I, who am very sensitive to latency, don't notice a rolling 1 frame of lag. Now, it's when you start to get to things like pound cables and the SCART to HDMI box that have rolling from 3 to 5 or 5 to 7 frames of lag, that's when you really start to notice a difference. And the MIMO Genius 2 isn't that bad, but it's enough and it jumps enough of a difference where that you do see that stutter in movement. So this is one of those things where, I'm not throwing shade at a device that's old and did its job well enough when it was released, especially if you were using it in arcade cabs and you just needed a solution to get you through. But while I really appreciate Marco going back and rechecking all of these devices to see where they stand comparing them to modern solutions like the OSSC Pro and the Retro Tink5X, the two kings of downscaling, this one doesn't really hold up, but I still found it to be, I love watching these videos. I've been wanting to do stuff like this for years, and after Marco's done them, I have no desire to do it anymore. He did a much better job than I could have done. He nailed all of the points. He tests all the voltages, tests all the latency. So if you're somebody like me that's very curious about this stuff, I would absolutely watch this video. Even if you don't even really like downscaling, I just really appreciate these kind of analysis videos, and it gives you a perspective of what to expect. Also, funny enough, Marco showed a clip of me talking about the Genius 2 back when I did a downscaling video with My Life in Gaming, and I have almost no memory of that. I don't know if it was one of those times where I was just in the middle of a burnout and just kind of working as hard as I could to get stuff done. I just remember not liking the Genius 2. I don't really remember why, and I imagine the latency had to have been a big part of it, but I don't know. It's, as somebody who's been making videos for a long time now, there have been a couple of times where I've seen videos that especially videos I've been a guest in, but even some videos that I've done that I'm like, what's that? And then I start to watch it and go, oh, I remember that now. So yeah, I don't know. And by the way, that doesn't necessarily mean a product is good or bad. It just means I was probably brain dead, shot from working too many hours when I was shooting those things. But yep, so check this out if you're into downscaling stuff and you're just a curious nerd like I am. The OSSC Pro now has an official Switzerland seller. Jan from Consoles For You or Classic Game Store, both are the same store, just with different names. They are now carrying the OSSC Pro, as well as continuing to carry the official OSSC Classic, not some low-cost, terrible, low-quality clone that you see on AliExpress, but the official, well-built original OSSC. So I briefly mentioned last week that there was going to be more sellers, and I think I missed Jan just under the mark of getting the podcast in, but I wanted to follow up now. So this is obviously regional. If you're in Switzerland, it's a no-brainer. If you wanted an OSSC Pro or Classic, this is where to buy it. If you're in a different country, I would just basically check all of the stores and see what's going to be cheapest to your door. Obviously, I mean that in a nice way, but my job is to get the best recommendations at the cheapest prices to everybody here. So if you're in Switzerland, there you go. Now you have a very easy way to purchase both the OSSC and Pro. And elsewhere, just check and cross your fingers. You'll be able to find a store where the shipping and import taxes aren't going to be too much for you. But thanks to Jan for always working hard to get these products in stock and really doing everybody in Switzerland a favor. Next up, a Kickstarter campaign was just funded for a brand new Sega Genesis game called The Cursed Legacy. And it's a run-and-gun action platformer with some exploratory Metroidvania-like gameplay. And according to the devs, the game is already finished, and they're just seeking funding to launch a physical edition. Additionally, The Cursed Legacy is not a sequel or spin-off to The Cursed Knight, despite being made by the same studio, which thanks to Stika for writing the post and clarifying that, because I was also a bit confused. Don't get me wrong, the game looks awesome. I just was wondering how it tied into the others, and I guess it didn't. So also, if you want a preview of it, Sega 16 just posted some more info on it, but this just looks like another awesome Genesis game if you want to buy it. GCS Studio and Broke Studio are definitely putting out good stuff. So I would absolutely check out the Kickstarter campaign and see if this is something you're into. You would be able to buy a digital copy for $12, which thank you so much to studios for doing this, whether you do it immediately, whether you do it after the physicals have shipped, whatever. I just really appreciate that because so many of us just don't have the space for all of these things, but we still want to play the game and support the developers. So I love that that's an option. You can get a complete in-box version for $56, which if you compensate for inflation is far cheaper than you would have bought a brand new Genesis game for back in the day. And you could get a fancy collector's edition for about $145 as well. So once again, this is already funded, and this is a company and a studio that have had a good track record of releases. So, while you can't ever guarantee that when you fund something like this, you're going to get your game or it's going to be what you want, going with companies that have consistently put out good releases the way that they were expected to be is always a much safer bet. So myself personally would be very comfortable supporting this one, but obviously that always has to be up to you. So check out Stika's post for more info if you're interested. We have found another capture card that can do true 480i capture over HDMI, and it's absolutely awesome. Thanks to Mike Chi and Voltar for letting me know about this one and for kind of poking and prodding me to make me get one, because at first I was like, I've tried a whole bunch of datapath cards. They're all great, but whatever. And they were like, no, you should really buy this one and take a look at it. And thank you for kicking me in the butt to do so, because this thing is basically everything any retro gamer who likes to do capture would want. So it's got dual DVI-D inputs, just like the DataPath Vision E2S, except this actually has an HDMI 1.3 chipset in there. So you shouldn't require an HDMI splitter in order to use it to avoid the green speckle issue. Now, I say shouldn't just because as a nerd, I've spent thousands of hours, hundreds of hours working with the DataPath Visions, but this VisionAV-HD card, I've only got hours on, certainly not hundreds yet. So I'm pretty sure it solves that issue. And having an HDMI splitter is always a good idea for many reasons, including just PS3 compatibility, but that's definitely a good sign. It also is able to capture up to 1080p 60 with lossless capture. So I ran the color compression test, I ran the counter test using the 240p test suite via the Tink 4K, and it works exactly like the Vision E series for that, where you get up to 1080p 60, pretty much flawless capture. Except while this one does accept audio over the DVI-D connections, with obviously you just need a pinout connector, either a little short cable or a dongle or something to get HDMI in, it's not perfect, which is weird for digital capture. Weird enough that I reached out to DataPath to see if maybe I'm doing something wrong, because digital audio is supposed to just be one-to-one always if you do it lossless. Same thing with video, but lossless audio is far easier to achieve. And for whatever reason, this card changes the audio in a way where when talking to the MD4A team, the wording that we decided would be fair is if you're streaming or using this card like a webcam, like I'm doing right now, or if you're even capturing home movies that are probably not going to have perfect audio anyway, it should be totally fine. You shouldn't have any issues, but don't use this card's digital audio input for MD4A analysis or any archival grade stuff. And once again, I'll follow up and I'll do another post if I figured out maybe I changed a setting wrong. There are no audio settings, but you never know. I mean, I'm only human. There's a good chance that I just screwed this up. But for now, I'm definitely wording it as if you're just doing basic stuff or even home movies, then it should be fine, but not archival grade stuff. Also, speaking of home movies, it is able to capture true 480i over HDMI. So that's 720 by 480 at 2997, which is 2 fields per frame. And with the previous data path cards, I tried 3 different models, both of the E series and then a different one that I had. It had to oversample it at 1440 by 480, which could potentially cause a bunch of issues. If you're scaling it, that could be a problem, but this is not the case. This is true 720 by 480 capture. And I also made sure that there is no color compression or any weirdness being applied when you use it. So this essentially, if you watched that Tink 480i video, could perfectly work with that with no issues. And once again, the audio, when you're talking home movies, I don't think that's going to be a problem in any way whatsoever. The only real negative is it does have a composite video input, but I would not recommend using it because the comb filter on it just isn't good at all. In fact, it's not even as good as a cheap $50 capture card. So, and it certainly doesn't hold up to the Tink 5X and definitely not the Tink 4K. So the composite video input, in my opinion, should just be considered a bonus or just forget that it's even there because it's just not something you would really want to use for basically anything. And it's kind of weird because I understand the audio thing. DataPath's main market doesn't really focus on audio. So just, having it compliant with HDMI requires audio. So just slapping that in and forgetting about it makes sense because these are very expensive cards that no one really uses the audio for. But having it, it's called the DataPath VisionAV-HD. So it seemed strange that a company that does focus on composite and S-video inputs with their line of products doesn't have a decent comb filter in it. But, and in fact, the other card that I tried, which I'm always drawing a blank on the name of it, that one had a decent 2D comb filter that's at least better than this. So yeah, it's kind of weird. And but whatever. Overall, I really like it. Lastly, though, which I have to say, and I probably should have just started with this, I don't like recommending stuff that you could only find used on eBay because the prices always go up when people start buying them. You have to hunt one down. It's a total pain. But this card is just so good. I had to get this information out there, and people are already annoyed that I did, and that's fine. You go ahead and be annoyed, and the rest of us will appreciate it, because having a card that could do direct analog 240p via RGB or component, direct 480i with the correct resolution through those as well, plus digital all the way up to 1080p 60, completely lossless. I mean, this is a big deal for capture nerds. For not capture nerds, this is why are you wasting my time, Bob? Which I get it. It's why I timestamp these videos. If you don't care about this, I totally understand. But this really is something that I think a lot of people would want to purchase. So check out the Tink 480i video if you haven't already for more info on what a lot of this stuff means. You can check out my mini review here. And of course, I will update the post if I find out anything different about the audio. And I also linked to the seller that I bought my card from, as well as a general link. So just make sure that the card that you're buying, if you click on the general one, says DataPath VisionAV-HD. And I do know at least one person that had a bunch left over from a bulk purchase that might be listing them soon for a reasonable price, not scalper prices. So if that's the case, I'll also update the post. But yeah, I'm excited about this one. I'm using it right now. It is forever going to replace my E-Series cards because the audio input, the dual input, and especially the true 480i capture is definitely something that makes these a step above. And don't go throwing out your Vision E-Series. They're still amazing cards. These are just better. So, you could always buy one new for $2,000 if you want. But personally, if you want one of these, just wait till you find one for a reasonable price on eBay. Next, the MemCard2 Pro just got another firmware update, and this is the MemCard Pro that works with the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 1, and the PlayStation 3 via USB save game transfer. And the biggest addition to this one is the ability to take a virtual memory card that has all of your preferences and all of your favorite settings already applied and use that as a template for any new virtual memory cards created, which is a big deal for people who really want to manage their VMCs and will just make every time you play a new game much easier to deal with. There's also been improving the speed of firmware updates, so that is faster as well. If you want the full list of changes and bug fixes, just check out the post. There's a ton of stuff in here that may or may not apply to you. And if you want more info on this, definitely check out Tito from Macho Nacho Productions video, because you get to see it in action and you get to see how awesome this thing really is. I'm not sure if any store has them for pre-order anymore, but as soon as they go back up for pre-order, we always let everybody know, because these things sell out pretty quickly and they're awesome. I'm glad that they do. This is really the go-to card for anybody with a PlayStation 1 or 2, and I just can't recommend it enough. The price is right, the features are absolutely outstanding, and unless you really just play games that don't require a memory card, or you don't really care about saving games for certain types of styles of games, this is really something that you should seriously consider. And if you have to end up buying a couple of other cards, it'll save you money in the long run. But check out the links if you're interested, and all the info is in the post. Next up, Tito from Macho Nacho Productions recently did a video about a modified Game Boy Advance SP that uses a kit from Joseph Tompkins and Jonas from Retro Game Evo that kind of turns it into the look of a Panic Playdate. That's the new yellow handheld console that's been around for a while with the crank on the side. And this kit kind of makes it into the same thing, just with the ability to play official Game Boy Advance stuff in there. So there's an IPS screen, an interface board. Tito goes through the entire installation, and this thing looks really cool. This is one of those things where even if you're not into handhelds, like I just prefer to play my games on a big TV sunk into a couch, I still loved watching the video, and I still think it's a really cool idea. And if you love the Panic Playdate and you also really like Game Boy Advance, this might be something that you should look into, because it would just be a really fun way to kind of have both in one, even though they can't play each other's games. It's just the look and feel, especially if you did the same color combination that Tito did in the video. So this is just another really fun project that I think a lot of people might be interested in watching, and maybe you'll end up doing it yourself. The buttons do look a little too close to the bottom for me. However, Tito said when he was playing it, he didn't have any problems whatsoever. But he also said, as any experienced gamer would say, that time is going to be what really makes the difference for this. Is it just a fun novelty where after playing for a couple hours, you're like, all right, my thumbs hurt? Or is it just not matter and you adapt immediately and it's going to be comfortable to your hands and your setup? And that's going to be obviously for every different person to decide for themselves, because everybody's hands are different. Everybody holds their controller or handhelds in different ways. But either way, I would watch the video just for fun and then kind of see if this is something that you'd be into, especially if you already own a Panic Playdate. Now it's time for this week's Mr. Updates, care of Lou from Lou's Retro Source. As usual, I'm just going to skim through these and give my thoughts where I feel like it, but if you want more details and visual examples, please check out Lou's video. First up, while it's not listed here in the post, Lou opened up a second channel showing a bunch of cool stuff that might not be the exact fit for people who just sign up for the news and the other Mr. related stuff, which I subscribed immediately because there's already some fun content on there, and subscribing on YouTube is free, so why not? Give it a try and see if you like it. But, I'm obviously a fan of Lou's, so more content from him is something I'd always be interested in. But as for the Mr. stuff, there are now fixes for the Neo Geo Pocket Color Core that aren't released yet. They're going to be implemented in a future update, but they fix a couple of different games and improve compatibility, which is awesome. I'm really looking forward to trying that core when it's a bit more stable and I could try to sync into one of those games and see what it's like. Next, the Amiga core has a new CPU mode that lets you select a 68010 CPU, which was a minor revision to the standard 68000 that included some fixes and new features. There's also a loop mode that can give a nice speed boost to certain games, but decrease compatibility with other games. So definitely check that out and see if that applies to the games that you want to play. Next, the NES core was updated with a couple of different mappers that were added to allow compatibility with games like stadium events and other multi-carts, and some more fixes and improvements were in there. So thanks to Paul BNL for doing those. One quick PSA, it seems like there's been some people using lower quality power supplies with the Mr. Pi, which is why I'm so freaking annoying about power supplies. And while I don't want this stuff to happen, it is a reminder that I'm not just word vomiting at you all when I talk about this stuff. Power supplies are crucial to any piece of electronics that you're using. So with any Mr. setup, make sure that you're using a quality power supply that has enough amperage to power all of the devices you have connected to it. Don't just grab a random power supply, USB one that you have laying around in a drawer that works fine to charge your phone overnight. That's probably not going to cut it. And a lot of those are probably dangerous to use if you bought them at a gas station for $2 or something. So just, I appreciate Lou having this PSA for people, and I'm going to keep talking about it even if you're all annoyed, because there's just so many issues that are caused by bad PSUs, both short-term issues that go away once you swap it out and potentially long-term issues as well. Next, the in-development Philips CDI core can now boot some games, but there's still no support for the MPEG module and stuff like that. But the update is still impressive because it's moving along a lot farther than expected, and I'm just really excited to be able to try some of those CDI games on the Mister eventually. So thanks to anybody who's able to contribute to this project and help the developer, because while I always tease the CDI, it is a pretty important piece of history, and I still think that Thunder in Paradise is the best FMV of the age. So I think it's just fun to play, and it shows exactly what games like that could do, whereas there's a lot of other pretty terrible examples out there. Next up, RetroFrog just started selling cases for the Mr. Pi. They cost $30, are available in 3 different colors. There is also Mr. FPGA UK selling a case for it, and Ultimate Mr. announced their upcoming case for it as well. So check out the links in the post and in Lou's video if you end up wanting to purchase one of those. You don't need a case to run these things. It's not like certain devices that require the case for the proper airflow, but it's always a really good idea because you just don't want to drop a screwdriver into it while it's running type of thing. And you'd be surprised how often stuff like that happens over in my lab, which is why I always have them covered. So, and lastly, Robert kind of came out of retirement quickly here to fix the N64 core to run on DE10 Nano clones. There's actually a pretty complicated explanation as to why these things happened, but essentially due to the RAM, or the SD RAM to be specific, the core needed to be tweaked to compensate for different types of it. I don't want to get into details, mostly because I'm not smart enough to explain exactly what Robert did, but if you are, please check out, or if you're just curious like I am, check out Lou's video as well as the links that are in this post that'll summarize all of that stuff. So that's it for the Mr. stuff. Thanks, as always, to Lou for keeping up with it. There's no way I'd be able to do this without him, which is why I'm very, very happy to support him on Patreon. And if you rely on Lou as much as I do, you should consider that as well. So thanks again, Lou. Next up, the Sega Saturn Shiro crew just set up a 1,400 square foot lounge at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo for people to come in and experience Sega games all the way back from the Master System and the arcade games of that era all the way up to the Dreamcast. Dave from the Shiro crew posted a video walkthrough showing you exactly what it was like, and I really wanted them to repost this here on RetroRGB just to kind of share some more Sega love with everybody, because it just looked like a ton of fun, and it looked like a great way for people to come in and experience all of the different eras of Sega and see some rare and cool stuff. So, I don't think I could do Dan's post justice or the video walkthrough, so I just want to say I strongly recommend any Sega fans to check this out. Skim through the post, watch the videos, read every word of the post, whatever. But this is just something that's so cool, and I'm so glad that they took the time to do this. So, obviously, I'm a huge fan of the whole Shiro crew, and it just, whenever they do stuff like this, it just really should remind everybody how awesome they are. So thanks for doing this, and definitely check out the video walkthrough if you want to see what this was like. And if you were at Portland Retro Gaming Expo, post in the comments. Let me know if you went. Let me know how it was. Let me know if you were in the Sega Lounge. I did really enjoy going a couple years ago, and I'd like to get back at some point. The 2024 Sonic Hacking Contest is now live, and the submissions and launch trailers are already up, and you could go through and kind of check out all of the different games that people have been submitting and all their differences. Chris did a post on this and posted some of his favorites, including one that just replaces the text with Comic Sans, which is oddly fitting for a Sonic game, but there's a lot of really cool stuff on here, and I strongly recommend checking out the post and of course going to the competition and seeing what everybody's been submitting. There's different submissions for 2D and 3D style Sonic games and different fun things people have been doing. The one that I was really intrigued about and would love to see it move forward is the Sonic CD conversion to a Genesis version of the game. So porting it over to run on the Genesis, which is going to be interesting because the Sega CD added new hardware to take advantage of extra modes. And I'm wondering how that's going to translate moving it down to just the Genesis hardware. The developer of that port said that there wasn't enough time to port all of the music over for the to make it in time for the hacking contest. So it's just basically the Genesis 1 music for now. But the goal would be to translate all of that music onto the Genesis sound chips, which that alone, I would love to hear what it sounds like, because I did like the Sonic CD soundtrack, and there was a couple of really cool songs on that one. I grew up with the US version. I know there's already people typing in the comments, the Japanese version was better. It's all subjective. I grew up with the US version. I liked it a lot. Japanese version was great too, but if you're interested in any of these Sonic ROM hacks or sometimes just complete reimaginings of the games, please check out Chris's post as well as everything in the Sonic hacking contest. Lastly, PixelFX have released some updates to their current and upcoming projects, which I'm going to run through as quickly as I can. It's probably going to be a while because there's certainly a lot to talk about here. But if you want pictures of what I talk about and some more details, check out their official press release, which of course I link to directly in the post. First of all, the analog bridge input, so the analog input modules for the Morph have been delayed till the end of the year. And apparently the hardware is completely finalized, but they've delayed it due to the firmware because they want to make sure that's stable before release. However, they did confirm some details that we had all speculated on before, and it all matches up perfectly, but just to confirm for anybody that was curious, the analog bridge itself is a PCB with analog to digital circuitry on it that sits between the Morph motherboard and the analog input boards itself. The analog input boards are essentially just that, a bunch of ports routed to a connector that plug into the analog bridge. So no circuitry, if you will, just the ports, which is a pretty cool idea. And that certainly separates them from some of the competition because now you could choose between which ones that you want. To purchase an analog bridge is $100, and it comes with the choice of one of the analog modules, which also comes with an injection molded backplate. So when you put it all together, it just looks like a normal scaler would be. However, if you wanted to, you could also purchase an extra analog input module, just the ports themselves, for an additional $25, which also comes with the injection molded backplate. So if you wanted to, you could buy something that you, let's just say, mostly use for D-sub, but then sometimes want to switch over to SCART or whatever. I think it's cool that you have those choices. I hope there's good ESD protection on there, because whenever you have plug-in modules like this, that's always a nerd concern. But overall, that's pretty cool. If you were an early bird Morph buyer, you will get a $75 voucher towards the purchase of this, which they'd mentioned before, but I wanted to reiterate it because I think that's a cool gesture. People that may have bought the Morph last year would have been expecting the analog bridge to be released at its original timetable of Q1 of this year. So, it's kind of a nice gesture to say, sorry for being a year late type of thing. Next up, also about that, if you don't want to wait, or if you're wondering how it performs, you could get a RetroTink 2X Pro and put that into pass-through mode, and that's a great way to route composite and S-video into the Morph, and then you could just go right into the HDMI port of that. And if you wanted component video, VGA, and SCART, you could use the OSSC for that. And whether the analog bridge would be better will all come down to that firmware, which is why it's really good that they paused and just kind of waited to make sure it was solid. Because if it has good filtering circuitry, good comb filters, then it would be better than those options. And if not, then you might as well just stick with what you've got. So I do think that was probably a good idea. Next, moving on, the team finally addressed the Morph's overheating issue, and they're offering a coupon code for a free replacement case that has better ventilation to help lower the temperature. Also, if you'd like to, you could purchase multiple for, I forgot what the price was, but cheap, very reasonable. So if you want multiple colors, or if you just, want a couple of cases to mess around with, that's pretty cool. Or if you wanted a case that maybe you wanted to cut a fan into, but you weren't sure if that was necessary or not, buying two might be a good idea for that. Grab your free voucher for one, purchase a second, pay for the shipping, and have that combined. Because that does lead me to something else, in that both the RetroTink 4K and OSSC Pro have options to install a fan. which are not needed in normal use. I've said this before for both of those products, but for your normal use case, they will never overheat. However, if you have it locked up in an AV rack somewhere, or if you just live in a really hot climate, that's obviously always a concern. So you might just want extra ventilation. So I didn't see any holes or mounting for a fan, so you might have to end up doing something like drill 4 small holes and put a fan inside. But hopefully somebody would come up with some aftermarket kit for that. Maybe some heat sinks to put across the hottest chips in there. And then same thing, maybe come with like a 3D printed guide so that you could put it over and drill the holes nicely in order to get the fan in. But for me personally, if a product was already overheating, I would want to be overly cautious. But that's because of my nerd history. It's nothing to do with the Morph. It's just part of the job that I used to have. I did thermal testing for those medical grade computers. So I just, whenever I see what is, I also see what it could be, which is a curse, by the way. It's a nerd curse that many of you listening are nodding slowly right now. Like, oh, I know. But so I just wanted to put that out there. If temperature really is a concern, grab the new case, but let's also figure out a way to get a fan in just in case. Because what's the worst that could happen? You don't need it, but you keep it cooler. Whatever. Also, I don't think there's a fan header on here, but on the picture that they've posted of the Morph motherboard, there do seem to be some pretty accessible vias on there. So maybe the team would be kind enough to let us know which are the best ones to solder power and ground to. And that way you could just hook yourself up with a cheap Noctua fan and go from there. Just don't forget with thermal testing, depending on the layout of the chips and the positioning and the airflow, you want to do testing for exhaust versus intake. There's always a debate about that, but anybody who's actually done thermal testing knows you don't actually know until you do the test. Every product's different, every orientation, vertical, horizontal, whatever. Sorry, that's my previous nerd history bleeding in. Anyway, moving on, they've also announced that the next RetroGem HDMI kit will be for the 3DO console, which makes sense because Dan already did the RGB mod for it. And while, of course, it's a ton of work to do an HDMI mod, at least all the groundwork was there. That was an awesome RGB mod. I did a whole launch video on that thing, and I think it sold out like immediately after that. So it's cool to see the 3DO up there. They've announced that the next RetroGem kits to be released would be for the GameCube, Wii, and Wii Mini, which is pretty cool. However, they also announced that the original Xbox HDMI kit is also delayed, which is probably a smart move because there's already an existing HDMI kit for the Xbox, and there's another one on the way that looks really promising as well. So why try to fight the competition when you could focus on things that nobody else or very few other people are doing? So I totally think that's the right move. And speaking of which, they've also delayed the Infinity Switch basically indefinitely, which I think that just lines up because Arthremis is about to release the SVS Switch, which is nuts. It has everything you could imagine, and you could even configure it to change the profiles on the RetroTink 5X and 4K based on the input. So you could have it so that when you switch to SNES, you get your favorite SNES profile. Switch to Genesis, you get that. So, trying to stick with the products that define you and not compete with other people is definitely a smart move. I don't have an MBA, but I'm pretty sure that's business 101 right there. And lastly, the team committed to doing monthly updates like this to keep their customers informed, which we all hear that a lot in the retro scene and it rarely happens, but I hope they do. And I hope, I've told so many devs this, I hope they realize that if they do a monthly update and they never miss, and if next month the update is, hey, everything that we said last month is still exactly the same. It's still in place. We're still on target. We just don't have anything new to say. That's a perfectly reasonable update. There's nothing wrong with that. Dead silence is the only thing that freaks out customers. And, when you do things like drop a significant amount of cost from your flagship product and then delay a bunch of other products, that makes people nervous because whenever that's happened to other companies in history, there's usually only one ending to that. So it's good to keep the communication going, just to let people know, like, hey, we're still in this, we're still doing it, we're delaying these things because we want them to be awesome. Here's what what do you need from us? So I hope they stick to that because that's such a big deal, putting people at ease for stuff like this. So that's basically it. We'll update again whenever there's any significant updates. And of course, once again, check out the press release if you want to see pictures and stuff. They got some cool pictures of the different cases and everything else there. But, it's good to see this thing moving along, and hopefully everything will work itself out. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thanks to everybody who watches, listens, plays nicely in the comments, and especially thank you to anybody who supports in any way, because it really is you who's keeping all this stuff going. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.